Hello students, now we're going to learn topic 6 on risk management. These are the learning outcomes for this topic. They include describe how risk assessment fits into risk management framework. In other words, you're going to learn two concepts. One is risk assessment, another one is risk management. You will know the relationship between the two. Next, you will explain the purpose of risk management to manage the hazards in the lab and the workplace. Next, you will learn some relevant regulations on risk management, as well as Workplace Safety and Health Committee regulations. Next, you will perform the process of risk assessment. This is the most important part because it's closely related to your assignment, your project. You will learn how to do that step by step. Lastly, you will learn the SG Secure movement in Singapore. Let's start with the legislations. We are going to learn the Workplace Safety and Health WSH Act. So this is a legal legislation set by Singapore government. And under the WSH Act umbrella, it has quite a number of subsidiary legislation. So all these are known as subsidiary legislation under WSH Act. You only need to learn these two circled in red. And they are WSH Health Committee Regulation and Risk Management Regulation. Now let's look at the Risk Management Regulations. It's under WSH Act. So this is where you can find it. Here's a link. It's from Singapore Statutes Online. This is where all the legal documents are packed under. You can go inside and take a look. So these are the different parts of the regulation, which I'm going to go through next. First, I shall give you an overview or the key points of risk management regulations. This regulation aims to instill greater ownership of OSH, occupational safety and health, through this process. Identify hazards, evaluate, assess and control hazards, introduce new controls and avoid incidents. In short, the overall objective of this risk management regulation is to give the employers, be it factory, be it institutes, educational institutes, be it restaurants, right? Give them the ownership to manage occupational safety and health in their premise by implementing this process. So these are the requirements from the employer's point of view. They need to assess risk arising from work. They need to eliminate or control the risks. They need to specify the roles and responsibility of the control implementation, means who is responsible for implement those control measures. And they are responsible for communicating the risks and control measures to the workers. In other words, this approach is known as proactive approach. Act before accident happen. According to the WSH regulation, employers are to revise the risk assessment at least once in 3 years, or when new information on the hazards or risks surface. The first one is not compulsory by law, but it's highly recommended. For example, in the past, you don't know that certain chemicals is carcinogenic. Now, UN issued a new health advisory saying that this chemical is likely to cause a carcinogenic effect. Then you should update your risk assessment form to include that. Second point is when there is an occurrence of bodily injury due to the hazard. This is compulsory by law. When that happens, you must immediately revise your risk assessment because it indicates that your existing risk assessment may not be sufficient. For example, in the past, you never expect a certain machine to cut the workers, but it happened. So that means you need to revise it. Last point is if there is a significant change in work practices. This is compulsory by law. Again, significant changes could mean you introduce a new process, a new processing step, bought a new equipment, which is significantly different from the previous one, or you require workers to do additional tasks. So, in short, if nothing happens, if none of the three happens, the employers need to revise at least 3 years. If any of this happens, especially the second and the third, you must revise your risk assessment immediately, not wait until 3 years. Right? For the records of the risk management, they must be kept at least 3 years. Right? If you only kept for 2 years during audit, you cannot produce the risk assessment form, you'll be considered non-compliance and you will be dealt with a certain penalties. Right? So these are the penalties. So the first offense is $10,000. Subsequently will be $20,000 or up to 6 months of imprisonment. So you are legally liable for not complying to the regulations. Now let's go into the specific sections within these regulations. The second section is definition. It defines hazard, risk, and risk assessment. So let's take a closer look. What is hazard? Hazard means anything with the potential to cause bodily injury and includes any physical, chemical, biological, mechanical, electrical, or ergonomic hazards. In short, hazards are harmful substances that are capable of causing injury to people. Risk means the likelihood that a hazard will cause a specific bodily injury to any person. So risk is the likelihood for a hazard to cause injury. Risk assessment means the process of evaluating the probability and the consequence of injury or illness arising from exposure to an identified hazard and determining the appropriate measures for risk control. In short, risk assessment includes first, evaluation process, secondly, determining the control measures. Section 3 defines what is risk assessment. In workplace, employers, self-employed person, and principal shall conduct a risk assessment in relation to the safety and health risks to any person who may be affected by his undertaking in the workplace. So it's the employer's responsibility. Commissioner may determine the manner in which the risk assessment referred to in paragraph is to be conducted. Section 4 is about elimination and control. Again, it's the employers, including self-employed person and principal, shall take reasonable practice to eliminate the risks identified. So how to control the risks? First, as mentioned earlier, the best one is always try to eliminate. However, sometimes it's not possible to entirely eliminate the hazard or the risk. Hence, the regulation states that you should take reasonable practice to minimize the risks. You should adopt the following approach, such as substitution, engineering, administrative, and PPE, right? If elimination is not possible. This is in decreasing preference. We have emphasized this before. Lastly, the employers shall specify the roles and responsibility of the person in the implementation. Section 5 specifies how the records of risk assessment should be kept. It's the employer's responsibility to maintain the record of risk assessment, for example, risk assessment form, right? And submit to the commissioner as required, right? So how long should the employer keep the record? Not less than 3 years, meaning minimally 3 years. You can keep more. Yeah, many companies actually keep for many years the previous version of the risk assessment form, but minimally you should keep 3 years. Next one is provision of information, means communicate the risk assessment findings to the employees. So employers shall take reasonable practice to ensure that any person in the workplace, meaning the workers, the employees, who may be exposed to a risk is informed of the nature of the risks, for example, toxic chemicals or high heat from the steam, as well as the measures or safe work procedures implemented, means how to prevent this from happening. For example, wear PPEs, perform in a chemical fume hood. Right. Lastly, the employers shall comply with the paragraph. Whenever the risk assessment is revised, they should communicate to the employees. Section 7 is about review of risk assessment. As mentioned earlier, risk assessment needs to be revised at least once every 3 years. This is to ensure that the risk assessment is up to date, because it's likely within the past 3 years, new things may have happened, new information may have obtained, so you need to do timely update. Part 2 is about exception to this rule, right? Means risk assessment may be done sooner than 3 years. So what are the special cases? First one is occurrence of bodily injury. For example, someone injured his arms, lost a finger, or a deep cut in the arms and things like that. So that's the first one, bodily injury, right? So it doesn't say must be serious injury. Even a minor injury could warrant review. Second one is a significant change in the workplace. Right? So the Act did not call for revising the RA when new information of the hazards is surfaced, but should do so just to be safe. So this is the very good practice. Section 8 is about offenses or penalty to the non-compliance. So again, it's the employer who will be responsible. So if you are the general manager or factory manager or production manager of the factory, and your workers, your employees, got injury because you neglected certain safety measures, you will be responsible. Yeah, your company will be fined, and the person, the management who is responsible for this may go to jail, go to prison if it's a second offense and onwards. Now let's do a little quiz. A manager who failed to keep the risk assessment record for inspection for at least 3 years from approval date can be fined. So this is clearly a non-compliance because they are supposed to keep it for at least 3 years, the records, and yet they didn't. So therefore, it's clearly a offense, right? So the first offense is 10,000, so it's correct. Yeah. Second offense is 20,000 or not more than 6 months of imprisonment. So this one should be second offense, not first offense, right? And also first offense will not involve imprisonment. Now let's look at the second regulation called the Workplace Safety and Health Committee Regulation. The previous one was on risk management. It specifies the process of risk management and the responsibilities from the employers. This one is about how to set up a committee, WSH committee within the company to manage the risk management process. So it specifies the duties of the committee. First, they need to conduct general inspection of the factory. So WSH committee of the factory shall inspect the factory at least once a month. So it's a monthly inspection, right? So it's not 3 years. 3 years, is earlier mentioned, is for a comprehensive risk assessment. Risk assessment is the form. Inspection, you don't need to fill in a comprehensive form. You just inspect and make some quick notes. For example, it sometimes can be a checklist for yes or no, meet or not meet, right? Following every inspection, health committee shall discuss the observations, right? So you still need to write down the observations, even in the form of a checklist, right? At the meeting, and will record in a report its opinion in respect to the lack of any measures or any deficient measures in the factory to ensure the safety and health of employers. So first one is your opinion regarding the lapses. Lapses means the loopholes, means the areas that needs further improvement, right? And also the recommendations to how to improve on the lapses identified. So after general inspection of the factories, the WSH committee is also responsible for inspection of factory after incidents or dangerous occurrence. So earlier what we mentioned, the monthly inspection is a routine inspection. When nothing goes wrong, you do it once a month. But when an accident, such as a bodily injury, occurs, then you need to immediately inspect, right? Immediately carry out an inspection. They shall immediately conduct investigation and furnish the chairman of the WSH committee with a report, right? So this report must be very detailed. After inspection has been carried out, WSH committee shall hold a meeting to discuss the observations during the inspection, and they need to record in the report its opinion in respect to the lack of any measures or deficient measures that caused the accident. Means what are the mistakes, what are the root causes of the accident. Secondly is recommendations for actions. The last part of the WSH committee responsibility is to assist in organizing certain activities to promote safety conduct of the work in a factory, right? So this is a bit similar to what you learned earlier. One of the 5 S is sustain, right? You need to build a culture. It's the same thing when it comes to safety matters, WSH matters. WSH committee shall organize any contest like a safety quiz, right? Workplace and lab safety quiz, or induction program for the new employees, competition, any activity for the purpose of promoting the safe conduct of work in the factory, right? So for example, what you guys did in the freshman safety orientation is actually organized by our ASC WSH committee. So we have finished discussing the WSH regulations. We know what are the requirements by law, right? The employers must carry out, which include the risk management process and the forming a risk assessment committee. Now let's look at the process of risk management itself, right? And a key reference to refer to is Code of Practice on WSH risk management, right? You don't need to read this for this subject, right? Because we already extract the key info from this Code of Practice. But next time, if you assume the role of a WSH officer or committee members, you definitely want to take a closer look at this Code of Practice, right? So risk management is a process of identifying, evaluating, and controlling risks at the workplace. So there are 3 steps. First, you need to identify the risks and then evaluate how severe and how likely they will occur. And lastly, propose control measures to manage the risk. It is a cornerstone to prevent death, injuries, and ill health at work. So the key words is prevent. The whole idea behind risk management is act before accidents happen. WSH risks also include mental well-being with any activity or exposure in the workplace, terrorism threats, and disease outbreaks, right? So nowadays we know many employees are mentally stressed, but we need to differentiate what is a reasonable stress from work and what is considered a workplace hazards, right? So it really comes down to the extent of the stress and the frequency of the stress, right? Just remember, mental well-being is included in WSH risks, and terrorism threats is included. Disease outbreaks such as food poisoning cases is also included. Now let's look at the risk management process, right? So on the right hand side, this diagram shows the 5 key steps in risk management. Start with preparation. You need to, for example, form a team, gather relevant information, and identify tasks of each process. Next, you will conduct a risk assessment. This is one of the most important steps. Your assignment is based on this. You need to identify the hazards. You need to evaluate the risk and propose risk control. Next is implementation. So who is going to implement the control measures? For example, you think the floor is very uneven and may cause people to fall down, tripping, then someone needs to replace the floor tiles. Then you need to identify. This stage is not identified. This identify is happening in risk control. This stage is not, the identified person must carry out the work, right? And to ensure that it's been properly done, there should be audit to check. Next is record keeping. So the risk assessment form, the implementation evidence must be properly kept for at least 3 years. Review means to regularly review the risk assessment. Do you still remember how often we need to review the risk assessment form? Yes, it's minimally 3 years. And you will need to immediately review when there is a bodily injury and when there is a significant change to the process. Also, when you obtain new information about certain process or hazards, you are highly recommended to review as well. Just now we mentioned the risk management process, which is the entire 5-step cycle, which include the preparation, risk assessment, implementation, and communication, right? Here is under implementation, communication is mentioned, okay? So risk assessment is one critical step of risk management. So don't confuse these two. Risk management is broader. It includes risk assessment as one of the steps. So risk assessment is a cornerstone of risk management. It allows us to identify the hazards and also propose control measures. Now let's go through each of the 5 main steps in risk management. Start with the first step, preparation. If you remember, I mentioned earlier, in the preparation step, you first need to form a team or assemble a risk management team. So risk management team consists of the leader and the members, right? Preferably, it should be multidisciplinary, consisting personnel from all the workplace functions. For example, if you are doing a risk management of the factory production, you are making pharmaceutical products, right? And the team should consist of factory manager, the production manager, the supervisors, and if you want, one or two of the representative of the workers, provided if they know the process well, and also a QA QC personnel, right? So RM team is a primary team responsible for the overall RM direction of the company. Normally, they will report directly to the big boss in the company, right? A SG Secure representative should be appointed to identify the potential terror threats and manage these threats, right? So SG Secure is a Singapore national movement counter-terrorism efforts, right? So a company should appoint an SG Secure representative. This representative could be part of the RA team as well, right? RA team are responsible for conducting RAs within the scope defined by the RM team, right? So in short, there are 2 teams. One is a risk management team, which is a broader team, and risk assessment team, which can be like a subcommittee of that. But very often they overlap. So some of the people actually sit in both committees. What's the core responsibility of a risk management champion? A champion is like a team leader. They need to have knowledge and expertise on RA, RM. They need to know how to formulate a risk management plan for your company. They need to know how to do planning and coordination, such as form a risk management team and coordinate the risk management tasks. Also, they need to know how to implement and monitor the risk management. For example, they need to recommend the risk control measures, assist in the monitoring process, and provide regular updates, right? Also, they should be responsible for the documentation and the communication, right? In short, the risk management person should both have technical know-how on the safety aspect, as well as very good people skills, know how to do coordination, how to do reporting to the management. Under the preparation step, in addition to forming the team, also very important is to gather the relevant information. Before we can conduct any risk assessment, you need to know the background info about the process or about the location. It will facilitate the understanding of the workplace and therefore enable effective risk assessment to be conducted. So what kind of info are we looking at? For example, the plant layout, process flow, list of work activities, list of chemicals, machinery, records of past incidents, relevant legislations, inspection records, observation, so on and so forth. So you need to gather those info. Very often they are archived in a central location in the company library, for example, in the cloud. Now let's move on to the second step, and one of the most important steps in the whole risk management process. Let me repeat, risk management includes these 5 steps. Risk assessment is one of the key steps. So now we are looking at how to conduct risk assessment. There are different ways of conducting risk assessment as listed here. The one that we are going to teach you, and one of the most commonly used one, is known as Job Safety Analysis, JSA. So what is Job Safety Analysis, JSA? JSA is a method that makes a job safe by identifying the hazards associated with each job step and developing solutions to each hazard that either eliminate or control it. So in other words, job safety analysis focuses on the job step, right? Focus on the job step. It focuses on breaking down a very complex process into its component steps. And for each component step, we will identify the hazard and the proposed control measures. It consists of these 4 steps. Job selection. So that's the main job area you are looking at. Later, I'll give you some examples of a job selection. After that, you need to break it down into its sub-components or sub-tasks. Then you need to identify the hazards within each sub-component. Lastly, you need to propose hazard elimination and control methods. Let's first look at the job selection. Task is selected to have its risk assessed by weighing the following factors: frequency of past accidents, severity of past accidents, high incident potential, new job, or infrequently performed jobs. Let me explain. For example, your company is making instant noodle, right? It's a food company making instant noodle. And the job we are looking at is the instant noodle making, right? Because the company actually may have a few products. One is the cup noodle making. One is the packet noodle making. So you can first select, do you want to do risk assessment on the cup noodle making or on the packet noodle making? And then there is another separate step on making the seasoning. So you first decide the job selection. For example, we decide to choose instant noodle, the cup noodle production, right? Because why? Because in the past 1 year there was 2 accidents, and it's the highest incident rate among all the jobs. Hence, we need to do it, right? Also, the severity can be quite high, so on and so forth. Next step is to break down the job, right? Because using the example I mentioned earlier, the instant noodle production, the cup noodle production as a job, it actually consists of a number of sub-steps or sub-components. For example, start with the dough mixing. In fact, start with the ingredient weighing the dough, the salt, weighing the flour, the salt, the additives, and so on and so forth. Next step is dough mixing. After that is lamination, and then steaming, and then frying, packing, right? So those sub-steps are known as job breakdown. The rule is that you need to break it down into neither too detailed or too general, right? So this is example, tree planting. Too detailed means every single step, small step, such as pick up the shovel, point the shovel down, you leave no point, right? It will create unnecessary work and distract the users from the main points. Too general means you did not break it down into specific enough. For example, you only have 2 steps: dig the hole or plant the tree, right? So a proper one would be more like this, right? You need to identify the key steps. Right? Next step in the JSA is hazard identification. Earlier, we already identified the main job. We also break down the main job into the sub-steps. Now we are going to look at the hazards within each sub-step. So what are the hazards? Types of hazards. Process-related hazards would include physical, mechanical, electrical, chemical, biological, and psychosocial, right? So this is more about mental well-being. So this will give you an idea of how to identify the hazards. Another way to look at the hazards could be looking at the individual and organizational factors. Individual factors such as individual characteristics and fitness, such as eyesight, personal health conditions, such as allergies or chemicals. This one is how will your process cause harm to the employees, to the workers. For example, high heat will burn their hands, chemicals will make them have skin burns and things like that. So it's affecting the individual. Organizational is something that's from the company, right? Company rules. For example, excessive workload, prolonged working hours, inadequate training, right? These are the organizational hazards. Workplace and job-related factors, such as environmental factors, like lighting, the aircon, the weather. Now let's look at how to fill in a risk assessment form, RA form, right? This is what you guys will be doing in your group assignment. So please pay attention. And this template is obtained from recommended template by WSH Council Singapore. So it's an industry standard template. You may encounter a very similar one in the future when you go to the workplace. So please pay attention on how to fill it up. The first part, the top part, is about the particulars. You need to fill in the name of the department or the lab name. Also, you need to identify the process, right? The process in this case is teaching and research, the second line. So teaching and research is the main job in the job selection. So this is the main job we selected, teaching and research in the chemical pilot plant. This is within ASC, right? All the chem engine students will have a chance to work in the CPP in the future modules, right? And also, we need to fill in the dates. There are 3 dates to fill in. The original assessment date means that it's the first review date. The current date, it's the last review date. Also, the next review date means the future one. Remember what we said earlier, according to the WSH regulation, the next review date must be within 3 years from the current one. So it's okay. In this case, we are being a bit careful. 2 years we will review already, because the reason is that this is the first time we use the CPP. It's a new chemical pilot plant. We want to be a bit more cautious. So we don't wait until 3 years. We will evaluate after 2 years based on the records of the incidents, if any. This part is for you to fill in the members, the RA members, including the leader and the members. Remember we said this one should be done in the preparation step. You need to assemble a RA team, consist of the leader and members. This part later I'll mention. After you complete this, you need to submit to someone to approve, normally in a management role. Let's continue with this RA form. As mentioned earlier, you need to first select a job, right? Select a job. In this case, we focus on teaching and research at the CPP. So this is the job we selected. So we are conducting RA for this particular job. Because teaching and research is such a broad scope, we need to break it down into the subcomponents or the major work activities. In this case, we break it down into first, chemical delivery, storage, and preparation. That's before we conduct the lab lesson. Secondly, setting up the equipment. For example, turning on the equipment, turning on the valves, and checking the signal and things like that. Running the lab means operating the equipment, facilitating the teaching, managing the class, and things like that. Number 4 is disposal of chemicals and the shutting down equipment. So after we end the lab work, what we need to do. So we write it down here on the work activity. This is the breakdown of the job. After that, we need to identify the hazards. So identify the hazards should be based on the work activity, not based on the main job, because that's too broad. So under the first job activity, which is delivery, storage, and preparation, we identify the following hazards. First one is dropping of chemical glass storage container, right? We also write down the injuries related. Contact with a chemical, for example, corrosive chemical. Lifting of heavy packing materials, Some can be very heavy, like 20 kg, so it could cause back pains or trips. Right? Another one is storage as well. Okay. Now let's take a closer look at the hazard identification, right, in the chemical pilot plant. This time we use another work activity, which is run in a lab. Earlier example was on the deliveries, storage, and preparation. Now we look at during the lab lesson, what are the potential hazards. So step 1 is write down the hazards here. Write down the hazards. Again, hazards are the substances, equipment, or processes that may cause injury to the users. Step 2 is write down the possible injury or ill health, means the negative impact or consequences as a result of the hazards. Step 3 is to write down the existing control. State the preventative or safety measures that are already in place to control the hazards. So let's take a closer look. When running the lab, the first hazard identified is contact with a chemical, such as skin, respiratory, eyes, etc. So what are the health injury affected by the released chemical, toxicity, corrosivity, etc. Existing control, PPE, and ventilation. The lab are well. The chemical pilot plant has good ventilation, and the students were briefed on wearing PPEs. The second hazard is cut by broken apparatus such as glasses in abnormal operation, injury to the body parts under the injury. Existing control is PPE. Next hazard is unsafe contact with electrical equipment. The injury is electrocution. Next hazard is entanglement with moving equipment. Injury is injury to the body parts. Right. So try to understand the difference between hazards and the injury. Right. Hazards is the substance that caused the injury. Injury is the result from the hazard. After identifying the hazards, we need to evaluate the risk. Means how likely it is for this hazard to occur and how bad is the consequence from the hazard. So risk evaluation is the process of estimating the risk levels for the hazard and their acceptability. This is used as a base for prioritizing actions to control these hazards. Right. So the reason why we want to evaluate is so that we know which hazards we should prioritize on. Means we should immediately implement some risk control measures. Risk is made of two parts: predicted severity of the hazards and the likelihood of occurrence of the accident or ill health, taking into account of existing risk controls. So whenever we do risk evaluation, always bear in mind of these two things. Severity means how bad is the consequence, how severe is the consequence. Likelihood means how likely or how often for the hazard to occur. Now I'm going to introduce to you again an industry standard matrix. This is known as the risk evaluation matrix. This one is to determine the severity level, right? Severity in this particular matrix, it has 5 levels from 1 to 5. 1 is negligible, means quite minimal consequence. Next one is minor. What's the definition of minor? Minor is injury or ill health, including mental well-being, requiring first aid only. Includes minor cuts and bruises, irritation, ill health with temporary discomfort, fatigue. Right. So first aid is able to take care of this type of injury, and it's considered minor. You don't need to see a doctor. Right? Next, level 3 is moderate. Moderate refers to injury or ill health requiring medical treatment, including laceration, burns, sprains, minor fractures, psychosocial stress. Dermatitis means a skin problem, and the work-related musculoskeletal disorders, right? Means bone problems or muscle problems, right? So the keyword in this is medical treatment. What do you mean by medical treatment? Means you need to consult a GP, like a clinic or polyclinic. Short-term hospitalization. What do we mean by short-term? Usually defined as under 24-hour observation, but you are released afterwards, so not more than 24 hours. So it's considered moderate. Next one is major. Major means serious injuries, serious occupational diseases or exposure, includes amputations, major fractures, multiple injuries, occupational cancers, diagnosed mental illnesses, acute poisoning, disabilities, and noise-induced hearing loss. So major is no longer discomfort, no longer a simple treatment at the clinic. It requires very often long-term hospitalization or extensive treatment, sometimes a surgery, for example. Also, the injuries can lead to disabilities. For example, hearing loss, amputations, major fractures. All those are very serious disabilities. So again, the keyword is could lead to disabilities and also long-term, means more than 1 day hospitalization. The highest level is catastrophic. It includes death, fatal occupational disease or exposure, or multiple major injuries, right? If you only have one major injury, for example, you lost one eye, it's considered major. But if you lost two eyes and hearing, right, it's considered catastrophic. Yeah. Amputation, you lost one arm, maybe it's likely to be under major. You lost two arms and two legs, it's very likely to be catastrophic because it's major, multiple major injuries. So everyone must familiarize with that definition because you need to know this in order to determine the level to be, is it a 3 or 4 or 5? Now let's look at another risk management, risk assessment matrix for likelihood. Likelihood is how often or how frequent these accidents will occur. Again, it has 5 levels from 1 to 5. 1 is rare. The definition of rare is not expected to occur, but still possible, right? So all the yellow words are our explanations to you, for you to understand. So rare means highly unlikely to occur. For example, factory explosion, collapse of building due to earthquake. Singapore so far, we don't have major earthquakes, right? But it's possible. It's not entirely impossible. It's possible. It's just highly unlikely. Then if you want to include that in your risk assessment, then you may put as 1. The next level is remote. Remote means not likely to occur under normal circumstances. Means in normal circumstances, it might occur. So this is referring to unlikely events, things that happen less than once in 10 years. Means in last 10 years, we have nothing. And also, if in the last 20 years, we don't have such thing. But about 20 years ago or 30 years ago, there was one incident. Then we can put it as remote, right? So for example, if someone hit by a fan falling from the ceiling, right? In some classrooms, there may be a fan. So far, we never heard that happening, but maybe 20 years ago, there was one incident. So we could put it as remote. Next one is occasional, means possible or known to occur. So possible to occur means it happened at least once in the past 10 years, right? So if the scenarios tell you the accidents happened once in the past 3 years, or it happens in 2017 till now, it's only about 8 years or so. So it's not that long ago. So definitely we will put it as occasional. So this occasional, don't confuse it with our everyday use of the term occasional. People ask, hey, how often do you eat sushi? You say occasional. But when people ask, so how often? You say, okay, once a month. Now, occasional is not the same as occasional in risk assessment. Your everyday use of occasional could be much more frequent than what we use in the risk assessment. The idea behind is that in risk assessment, we want to be very cautious. Careful, in other words, right? We want to be very cautious. So we don't want to easily neglect past incidents. If something happened in the past 3 years, even if it's once, we will take that as occasional because it's possible or known to occur, right? So try to remember the difference between risk assessment and everyday use of the word occasional. Next one is frequent. Frequent means common occurrence. So how do we define it? It's typically something that happens recurring once a week, once a month, or at least once a year. So if something that's happening year after year is considered frequent, even if once, even we have, for example, a slip and fall in a lab due to the wet floor, one incident every year, we still take it as frequent. It's different from occasional. Because if you have one slip and fall in the past 3 years, but only one incident in the past 3 years and not occurring, not a frequent a pattern of recurrence, you may take it as occasional. But if this slip and fall happens regularly, at least once a year, means it's common occurrence, means there's a systematic issue behind. Last one is 5, almost certain, continual or repeating experience. For example, every day, every time someone uses. This is typically, for example, the noise from a machine. Every time you on the machine, it will give very loud noise. Then it's definitely almost certain. All the environmental factors. The lab, the aircon is spoiled. Every time you work in the lab, it's very hot. And this could be a hazard because people may get fainted, right? Or the bench, the lab bench is too high. Every time someone work next to it, they may have back pain. It's ergonomic design. So that one is also considered almost certain. Again, everyone must familiarize with this definition and know how to apply them for your project and also in the test. So after evaluating both the severity and the likelihood, we can use this table to evaluate the overall risk. So on the vertical column, this is the severity. On the horizontal row, this is the likelihood. We use this one, multiply this one to get the product. And this number is known as the RPN, risk prioritization number. Remember, the purpose of risk evaluation is to determine the prioritization of the risks. We will prioritize on those with a high number, meaning that they are very dangerous. So this table will give us a quantitative way to know which ones are very, very dangerous. For example, if something is catastrophic and it's almost certain to occur, it's 25, it's the highest possible one. You should immediately take care of it, right? To address it, right? Bring it down. And so there are 3 categories. The pink area is the high risk from 15 to 25. The yellow area, the middle zone, is known as medium risk. It's from 4 to 12. And 1, 2, 3 is generally considered as low risk. And it will have implication. Later I'll explain whether it's low, medium, or high with regards to what actions we should take. So after determining the risk level, low, medium, high, we need to take actions. If it's a low risk, it's considered acceptable, 1, 2, 3. We don't need to take any additional risk control because 1, 2, 3 is considered very safe. In life, it's not possible to entirely eliminate all the risks, right? In other words, it's impossible to make everything 0 or 1. We have to take certain risks, but acceptable means very, very low, right? Medium is tolerable. It's between 4 to 12. So what do we need to do? We need to evaluate. And we need to consider implement control measures, right? And management attention is required. So in short, for medium risk, we need to take action. But sometimes, if it's a low medium, for example, it's 6 or something, or 4, sometimes people may live with it, right? People will say, we take no, but we don't, at the moment, we don't really have a better control measures. We will just be very mindful of it, and we will reinforce the training and things like that, right? So the idea is always try to bring the median to low, right? But unless it's really not possible and it's a very low median, sometimes we may live with it. Right? If it's in a high risk level, it's definitely not acceptable, right? High level means 15 to 25. It's pretty high already. So they must be reduced to at least medium before work starts. Yeah? That's why we put tolerable. Work can continue with medium range, especially if it's in a low medium, right? Although we will constantly explore ways to bring it down to low, but it's tolerable. But high, you cannot even tolerate. You cannot let people proceed under the high level. There should not be any interim risk control measures. Means you cannot just do something to temporarily remove the risk. You need to address the root cause of it and bring it down to at least medium, right? So risk control measures should not be covered entirely by PPE, right? Because PPE is the least preferred in the risk control measures. If you always use PPE, then what if one day people forget to wear PPE or didn't wear properly? Then they will be exposed to high risk. So therefore, you need to employ other methods such as engineering, substitution, administrative, things like that. If practicable, hazards should be eliminated before work starts. Management review is required, right? This one is management attention. This one is review, right? They must give green light before you can start. Now let's look at an example of how to perform risk evaluation using the example of chemical pilot plant. Step 1 is to evaluate the severity, the S. Step 2 is evaluate the L, likelihood. Step 3 is to calculate the RPM. So let's look at the first hazard, contact with a chemical, skin, respiratory, eyes, etc. So what's the severity? We put a 3. 3 means moderate, means if this occurs, it will require medical attention. So may not always be sufficient to just use first aid, put some cream. You may need to see a doctor, right? Especially, for example, the chemical go into your eyes. The doctor need to examine the extent of the injury, right? Also, if it's an extensive skin burn, you need to see the doctor, right? So as long as you need to see a doctor, it's a 3. But unlikely you will get hospitalized and unlikely you will cause a disability from this. So we put a 3 here. It's not a 4. All this S, L is heavily affected by past incidents record. Means based on the past 10, 20 years of experience, what's the consequence? These students get seriously injured? If that's the case, then you should revise it to 4. But if it's mostly just a GP consultation and no extended hospitalization, then it's a 3. Yeah. So likelihood, again, this is based on the past record. If in the past our record shows that this is possible to occur, this means at least once in the past 10 years, then we will put a 3. But it's not like once a year. If it's more than once a year, then it becomes a 4 already. So we know that it's possible, but it's not that frequent or not that common. So the RPM is 9. 9 is in the medium range. Medium range means we need to take action. So what are the additional control measures? Later I'll explain, okay? So you just continue to do this for the others. After evaluating the risks, we need to control the risks by proposing control measures. This has been introduced to you earlier, hierarchy of hazards control. There are 5 methods. The most preferred one is elimination. Next one is substitution. Next is engineering. Next is administrative. Lastly is PPE. Right? So always go down according to this order. So I want to highlight this. Severity of hazard can drop only if elimination or substitution measures is used. This is a general principle when we do risk assessment. Severity means how severe is the consequence will only drop if elimination or substitution is used, because these two change the nature of the hazards from the source, right? For example, you replace concentrated sulfuric acid with diluted sulfuric acid, then it's a substitution. Then the severity of skin burn is definitely reduced, right? If you use other methods such as chemical fume hood, you use the PPE, gloves, and things like that, in general, we will not reduce the severity after you implement. The reason is that the nature of the hazard is not changed. You are still using concentrated sulfuric acid. It's just you use it in the chemical fume hood and you wear a chemically resistant gloves. You may say that, hey, I by using those things, I'm able to eliminate the severity. What if accidents happen? It will not be as severe, but there is a chance you don't use the chemical fume hood properly. For example, you didn't lower down the sash enough, right? Or your PPE you didn't wear properly. You expose certain parts of your hands, right? For example, your wrist area, right, is exposed. So if an accident occurs, it will still cause the same severity if you don't use it properly, you don't use the control measures properly. While in the case of elimination of substitution, it's not dependent on how you use the chemical, because the nature of the hazards has been changed to a lower level. So bear this in mind. We want to introduce this concept called the ALAP. ALAP stands for as low as reasonably practicable, right? So it has two components. Practicable means an action is practicable when it is capable of being done. For example, it's technologically feasible. You cannot propose something that's not practicable, right? You cannot propose, in order to eliminate the chemical hazard, we invent a new chemical that is totally hazard-free. But there is no such magic chemical that is not practicable, right? So practicable is emphasizing it has to be realistic, right? Reasonable means what you propose should take into account of the severity, likelihood, and the knowledge of the hazard. Means it needs to make sense to be effective. What you propose have to be reasonably effective, right? Based on the severity, likelihood, and the knowledge. If something is super severe, then what you propose should commensurate, means correlate well with the severity, right? If something is very low level, you no need to propose something very expensive and very elaborate, right? So reasonable is something that's effective and it correlates well with the severity and likelihood and the knowledge of the hazards. So the goal is to reduce the level to ALAP as low as reasonably practicable. This is an example of using the hierarchy of risk control to eliminate or control the hazard during the spray painting process. The hazard is inhalation of toxic vapors, right? Some of the paintings will have toxic vapors. So if we use elimination method, we will alter the process so that the article does not need to be spray painted, right? Using another different methods, for example, pre-colored materials. So this will totally change the process and eliminate the use of this toxic chemical. Substitution will replace the harmful components of the chemical with a non-toxic chemical or less harmful one, right? Engineering use automated machines to carry out the spray painting, enclose the particle to be spray painted. So engineering control typically revolve around using machines and using certain structure, certain like a fume hood, certain equipment or certain physical structure, physical barriers to isolate the hazard. Right? Administrative, train the workers on the hazards of spray painting and assign competent persons to carry out the work activity. Administrative control typically involve training, provide adequate training, as well as job rotation, the shift, use shift to control the exposure type. In this case, it's using the training method. Lastly, PPE, provide approved and adequate PPE for the spray painting activity, right? Respirators in this case must be fit tested and must be trained. Now let's look at the example of risk control using the chemical pilot plant as example. The first step is to write down the additional control measures using hierarchy of hazards control. So you need to write it down. You will first consider elimination, followed by substitution, engineering, PPE, right? After that, you need to re-evaluate at the S and L with the implementation of additional control. So your new S and L should be based on if these new measures have been implemented, how will it change? Finally, you calculate the new RPM by multiply S and L, and the objective is to bring down the RPM from the high and medium risk to low risk if possible. Sometimes if it's really not possible and it's in the low medium range, we can live with it. So this example of a chemical pilot plant, the first hazard contact with the chemical, skin, respiratory, or eyes. Initially, the RPM is 9 with the additional control of emphasis on housekeeping and pre-lab briefing. So it's more admin control. Admin control, normally we will not reduce the severity, but we will reduce the likelihood to 2, right? We cannot completely reduce it to very low, so we put a 2, so it's 6. So it's reduced from 9 to 6. The next one is cut by broken glasses. So by introducing emphasis on lab attire, so this is a admin plus PPE kind of control. Again, severity will not drop, but likelihood we can drop it down to 1 from 2 to 1. So there's a reduction. Next one is unsafe contact with electrical equipment. Initially was a 9. So we introduce safety training, admin control. We reduce it to 3 because electrocution is really quite unlikely to occur. So we put it as a 1. But you can propose other methods, not always limit to this. For example, if you think you could introduce some machine guards, right, to prevent students from touching the powers, electrical powers, then it's an elimination. So the severity could also, no, it's not elimination. Machine guards is an engineering control. So it may also help reduce, but it's already 1, so I think it's fine. But this one, the broken apparatus from the glass, if you propose to use something like a plastic, not glass, then it's a substitution method. You could reduce the severity from 3 to 2, right, if applicable. Last one, entanglement with the movement. Audit to check on the guarding state, right? So all the machines will have a machine guard, which will prevent the students from touching the moving parts of the machine. Existing control is already machine guard, but we are proposing regular checks on whether the guards are working. So this will help further reduce the likelihood to 1. Machine guard is considered engineering control, so we are not reducing the severity. So that's how you do the risk control. Now let's talk about another topic on SG Secure initiative in Singapore. SG Secure is a national movement to sensitize, train, and mobilize our community to play a part to prevent and deal with terrorist attack. This, I think, arises from the last 10 plus years ago when there was increasing terrorist attacks and threats around the world, right? Starting from the 9/11 in the US and many other countries. So Singapore realized we need to step up our effort in counter-terrorist attack. So this is a whole of Singapore can come together in response to terror threats and safeguard our way of life. To raise preparedness against terrorism, all employers are strongly encouraged to appoint an SG Secure representative for the workplace. So the role of SG Secure rep include champion SG Secure during peacetime, work with employer to implement SG secure initiatives such as train to become prepared citizens, employees to be briefed on run, hide, tell. All the TP staff, we were briefed on that. When a terrorist attack occurs, we need to run to a safe place, hide in a safe place, and tell means inform the authorities like the police, the SCDF about the terrorist attack. Press, tie, tell. This is when someone is bleeding, what you should do. Press on the wounds, tie using a cloth, and tell the medical people to come to the rescue, right? So those are very simple procedures, but can save people's lives, right, during the evacuation. And also be aware of the evacuation procedure routes. Also, employers should download SG Secure mobile app. I have downloaded it. So far, it has been quite peaceful. But if there is a major terrorist attack, this app will tell us what to do, right? What are the areas to avoid, and what are the things we need to do. And also, there is an e-learning course. And also, the SG Secure Rep will be the point of contact between company and MOM during crises. This is one example in the RA risk assessment form related to terrorism scenario. So the work activity is storage and use of corrosive substance such as acids like sulfuric acid. The header is theft of corrosive substance with the intention to cause human harm. For example, some terrorists may steal concentrated sulfuric acid from the lab and pour to people's face on the MRT or on a bus. Then it's actually a legitimate concern. So the severity is pretty high because it can cause serious burn to people, although the likelihood is pretty low. So the existing control is to keep under the lock and key, and we have a CCTV camera. So additional control is substitute the concentrated sulfuric acid with the diluted sulfuric acid. Implement mobile device usage tracking system, so we will know who took the sulfuric acid, right? The next step in the risk management is implementation. So previously we have done the risk assessment, right? And now we're going to implement it. So first, the risk assessment must be approved and endorsed by the top management, right? The employer should, as far as it is practicable, implement the recommended control measures as soon as possible. An action plan should be prepared to implement the measures, means when and by who, right? The timeline and responsible person. Regular inspection and process audit should be carried out. This will include both internal audit and sometimes external audits. Again, let's look at example of chemical pilot plant RA form. This part is approved by. So as mentioned earlier, after the risk assessment team has completed the risk assessment form, they need to submit to the management for approval, right? In this case, it's the Zetsu, the course chair of Chem Engine. He approved the risk assessment form for the chemical pilot plant because it's mainly used by the Chem Engine diploma. Also, in the form itself, you need to indicate who will implement. In this case, it's a bit generic. It's users and the house owner. User means the researchers. House owner means the technical TSO in charge of the chemical pilot plant. Sometimes if you can pinpoint to one person, you can write down that person's name. But sometimes it could be used by different users, right? It's shared by different users. Then you can put something like that. Yeah. Next step is record keeping, right? We need to keep record of the risk assessment forms, right? And also all the inspection records, the implementation records must be maintained, right? So the record should include the results of findings recorded in the risk assessment forms, risk control measures taken or to be taken, any safe work procedures, and most important thing, keep for a minimum of 3 years. The last step is review. Regular review of the risk assessment plan is critical. While employers are required to review the plan every 3 years, a review should take place whenever new information on the risk surface significant changes to the process and procedures and any incidents or accidents. This is the last two are actually compulsory by law. The first one is highly recommended. Right? Risk assessment team should undertake the same 3 steps: hazard identification, risk evaluation, and risk control when conducting a risk assessment review. Lastly, I want to talk about communication, right? Although in the risk management flowchart, communication is placed under implementation, but we want to emphasize that communication in fact happens in every stage, not just in implementation. In the, for example, preparation step, when you form a team, you need to communicate with the team on the objective, right? In the risk assessment, certainly you need to communicate with your team members on how to evaluate the hazards, right? And in the implementation, of course, you need to communicate to the whole company on what are the control measures and what are the activities to be taken to enhance their awareness of the risk management methods. And also in the review, in the record keeping, you need to communicate. So it's really throughout the risk management process. Communication is important. So purpose include engage and involve people to contribute to the risk management process, provide clarity on the risk, processes, control measures, perceptions, help stakeholders to make informed decisions. For example, you need to convince the management to buy new equipment, better equipment, because the old one is high risk. Sometimes management is reluctant. You tell me spend 50,000 to buy a new equipment. I thought the old one is perfectly okay. Well, then you need to tell them, no, it's not okay. In the past 2 years, we have seen 5 incidents, although minor, but it could result in significant, very serious incidents, and this will damage the reputation of our company. So we need to convince them of the need to take certain actions. Also, we need to inform the workers to wear PPE. Sometimes workers, out of business or neglect, they will not wear helmets, not wear certain gloves. You need to communicate to them the importance of wearing the proper PPEs, right? So they know the risks they are facing and the control measures. So the methods of communication include safety induction training at the beginning, regular committee meetings among the WSH members, notice boards, bulletins, email, phone calls, one-on-one discussions, especially those involved in the accidents, small group meetings, feedback sessions, hands-on training sessions. Finally, we reach the summary slide. In this topic on risk management, we cover first the WSH regulations on risk management. We talk about the 2 legislations that are relevant. First one is risk management regulation. Second one is WSH committee regulation. Secondly, we explain in detail how to carry out the risk management process, the 5 steps: the preparation, the risk assessment, the implementation, the record keeping, and the review. Lastly, we spend a lot of time going in detail of the risk assessment step using the method of JSA, job safety analysis. So the key steps include break down the job, and then identify the hazards, evaluate the hazards or evaluate the risks, propose control measures, and then re-evaluate the hazards after implementation of the additional control measures. So that's all for this topic. Hope you guys have learned something useful.